Interesting story emerged this week that the next and final episode, I think,
Yeah,
possibly in the final
final.
Final Fantasy VII remake trilogy, could be shifting from Unreal Engine 4, which the previous two entries have used, onto Unreal Engine 5. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good idea, and I think John agrees, and we'll tell you why.
I mean, fundamentally, UE5 and UE4 are the same engine. It's just that UE5 adds additional features such as Lumen and Nanite and all that that were not available in Unreal Engine 4. And usually when tackling new game projects in Unreal, you would expect them to kind of move on to the next iteration before locking it down and going with it. I mean, I could see an argument for sticking with UE4 only because they know they're familiar with it, but at the same time, it feels like this is a game that's not going to ship for some years. It would behoove them to sort of get on board with more recent versions, right? Uh,
Yeah,
and those technologies very specifically, I think, could help them a lot. Uh, Lighting, Lumen would be awesome, but it's not like 100% something that they would necessarily need to embrace. But I feel like the virtualized geometry stuff could be very useful because they went for sort of a density in the assets and
Hmm.
Rebirth. But if you actually looked closely at anything, it didn't really hold up very well,
yeah,
which is specifically the type of problem that Nanite seeks to solve, right? Is to allow for granular geometric detail at close proximity. So I think that would be a huge thing for them to do it. So logically speaking, this all makes sense to me. But obviously that also means the developer's going to have to change their workflow to match these new technologies, because jumping to something like Nanite, it's not trivial. And you do have to change the way assets are generated and the way you work in the editor and everything. It's not a simple switch, is what I'm saying.
yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah, and I think there's probably going to be the concept that Unreal Engine 4 support itself might be diminished or
Right.
even deprecated
Exactly.
during the development period of the third part of this trilogy. I mean, the first one came out in 2020. Just reading the Video Games Chronicle report here, the second part 2024. So realistically, we shouldn't be expecting it until 2028 anyway.
Now,
Where
oh, just to interject though, to be fair though, if you look back, it depends on how much customizing they've done to the engine. Like take NetherRealm for instance, up until Mortal Kombat 1, they stuck with
right,
their UE3 derived variant of Unreal
Wow.
Engine, right? So like up
yeah,
through Injustice 2, Mortal Kombat 11, those were both shipped on that Unreal Engine 3 derived technology. It's only with MK1 that they actually shifted then to UE4.
yeah, you're quite right. Another classic example is Arkham Knight, right, which
Right,
stuck on a not very old Unreal Engine,
exactly. And then
Unreal Engine 3.
when that, company made the switch to UE4,
They did a lot of work on it
they,
to get it running at 60. That's for
there's some
sure.
good looking stuff in there, but yeah, I think Arkham Knight kind of still wins out visually speaking. But so, I mean, it's feasible for them to stick with UE4, but I think it would behoove them to move forward.
Will, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think if it looks like it's going to take about as much time and effort to switch versus not, then they should switch because, you are going to be saving some time in terms of not having to manually place lights, not having to, manually do LODs and stuff like that, right? So there are some time savings associated with a lot of those UE5 technologies. And yeah, I guess it does take time to get up to speed with that and to make use of all of those features without hurting performance and without, relying too heavily on upscaling and all that other classic stuff. But yeah, I mean, if the game's coming out in 2027 or 2028, then yeah, I think it makes sense to just take the hit initially and then hope that you'll kind of, make up any lost time by working more efficiently in the time until then.
Yeah, actually, John, I was just reminded that we recently put out a piece of content which was the interview with Ninja Theory on Hellblade 2, which actually covers the scenario of how they moved from Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5.
Right.
And it did get a huge amount of views because it was late, but I do recommend listening to that interview because it's a fascinating insight into the whole concept of moving between those two iterations of Unreal Engine and the advantages that they had by moving to the new technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So And I guess one of the eye-opening things we learned from there is that they were using UE4 pretty late up into the development cycle.
Yeah.
That original Giants demo that they first showed off, that was done in UE4. So,
Right.
I was surprised to learn that. So they made the transition pretty late, but when they did, that interview talks about it. They went through that whole process of shifting their workflow, and they successfully did it. Now, obviously, it's a much smaller game in terms of scope versus something like Rebirth is a gigantic game, very very big, very different scope compared to Hellblade 2. So that does change things a bit, but I still think they can pull it off.